Ever wondered what makes a song truly unforgettable? There's a secret weapon that songwriters use, a powerful 3-letter technique. But be warned, many artists have landed in legal hot water when using it. This video will show you 7 simple steps to mastering this and crafting songs that leave a lasting impression. Just remember 3 simple letters, BMF. Welcome in. My name is Matt and I create videos that help everyone to write songs. In over 2 decades of songwriting, I've learned that a lot of people want something simple to transform their chord progressions. And one of the most powerful ways to change up common major key chord progressions is to borrow the minor 4, or BMF. So in this video I'm going to take you through 7 simple steps to mastering this emotional tool so you can BMF in your own songwriting. The first step is to learn what a key is and the role of borrowed chords. A key is related to a musical scale. All of the notes for a song in a particular key will come from this scale. For example, a song in the key of C major will use notes from the C major scale. This also includes the chords in a key. These are created by stacking thirds. That is, starting on a note from the scale, skipping a note, and then skipping another note. This leaves you with 3 notes per chord. Therefore, these chords are also known as triads. You can see this process on screen for the C major key. The end result of this process are 7 diatonic chords to use in a key. Each chord has a Roman numeral assigned to it. These numerals show you the function of each chord. Major chords have an uppercase Roman numeral, and minor chords a lowercase Roman numeral. The small circle is for the diminished chord. There are countless songs that are written strictly in a key and not deviating from the pool of 7 chords. There's nothing wrong with this approach, and its simplicity can help you, particularly when starting out with songwriting. But what if you want something a little different or more interesting? This introduces the idea of borrowed chords. As the name suggests, borrowed chords are temporarily taken from another key and used within the existing key of a song. This process is also known as modal mixture or modal interchange. Technically, you can use any chord from any key that you like, but the most common approach you'll encounter, and the simplest to understand, is borrowing chords from parallel keys. Parallel keys share a tonic note. That is the first note in a scale, the note which a scale or key is named after. For example, the C major key is a parallel key of the C natural minor key, and vice versa. The next step is to discover the minor 4 chord. When writing a major key song, the most common key to borrow from is the parallel natural minor key. This is also known as the Aeolian mode, but most people will simply refer to it as the minor key. Let's turn to the key of C major to dive a bit deeper. You saw this diagram earlier, with the 7 diatonic chords from the C major key and the notes from the C major scale that go into each chord. The 4 chord here is F major. A really common technique is to play this as a minor chord. So here you would play F minor. You don't need to know any more than this to use the chord, but a bit more detail can help your understanding. Look at the chords in the C major key compared to the chords in the C minor key. You can see that the 4 chord in the C minor key is F minor. So when you use the F minor chord in C major key songs, you are borrowing it from the parallel minor key. If you are familiar with the modes of the major scale, then you may know that the minor 4 chord can also be borrowed from the parallel Phrygian and Locrian modes. If this seems confusing, then don't panic. Just think of this as the minor version of the 4 chord. Now I've established where the minor 4 comes from, let's have a look at how you use it. One of the most popular ways to use the standard major 4 chord is in a cadence. A cadence is a chord progression of at least 2 chords that ends a phrase or section of a piece of music. It ends with the resolution of tension, providing a feeling of completion. The classic way to do this in major keys is to play the 1 chord after the 5 chord. You might see this being called the perfect or authentic cadence, often with the 5 chord played as a dominant 7th chord. Here's how that sounds in the key of C major with the G major and C major chords. On repeat, I use the G dominant 7th chord. Did you hear the strong pull to the 1 chord that the 5 chord created? This is critical to its role as a dominant chord, leading back to the tonic. I'll have a look at this in detail in a moment. Now let's bring in the 4 chord F major instead of 5 and use this in the cadence. Did you hear how this has a softer, more gentle sound? It still has a sense of completion, but not as strong as 5-1. This cadence is called the plagal or amen cadence. It is also commonly used in major key songs. Now it's time to try out the minor 4 chord in the cadence. Remember, in the key of C major, that this is the chord F minor. Did you hear how much more emotional and memorable this cadence was when compared to the major 4 chord? This cadence is called the minor plagal cadence. But why is it so much stronger than the standard plagal cadence? Let's look at the notes under the hood of these chords to understand the reason. The 1 chord C major has the notes C, E and G. The 5 chord G major has the notes G, B and D. And if you play it as a dominant 7th, it also has an F note. When thinking about how notes move between chords, you can use a concept called voice leading. There are many associated rules with this idea, but my only thought in this example is about finding notes that are the shortest distance from each other. The obvious starting point is the G note, as it's the same between the 2 chords, so there's no movement. Next up is the B note in the G chord. The nearest note to this in the C chord is the root note C. They are only half a step or semitone apart. This is the smallest distance in Western music and creates the most tension. In this case, the B note is known as the leading note or tone. It is leading strongly to the root note of the relevant scale. Listen to the notes in the C major scale and the feeling you get when B is played. It is yearning to move up to the C note. This strength of movement is what makes the 5-1 cadence so satisfying. The one remaining note is D. D is an equal distance apart from C and E. Because of this, and the fact that the distance is a whole step or tone, it has a much weaker sense of pull and movement. So you can see, in order to better show this movement and make it easier to play on the piano, I've changed the order of the notes in the G major chord. As a G note is still played in the bass, this is still a standard G chord. I made another video on the channel about voice leading if you want to learn more. Let's have a listen to the 5-1 cadence again. If you use the dominant 7th version of 5, it has a greater tension and supercharges the cadence. Look at the example of G dominant 7th to understand why. The added F note is only half a step away from the E note, so it's another leading tone. This means the cadence now contains 2 leading tones, strengthening the pull and desire to resolve to the 1 tonic chord. Have another listen to it now. Now let's move to the major 4 chord and the plagal cadence. In the key of C major, this is the F major chord. It is constructed with the notes F, A and C. So when moving to the 1 chord C major, there's a shared C note. The A note is a whole step away from the G note, so it doesn't have the strong pull of a leading tone. The heavy lifting in this cadence is being done when the F note moves half a step to the E note. This produces the subtler plagal cadence sound, but still provides a satisfying resolution. It's less tense than the 5 dominant 7th to 1 because it only has 1 leading tone. But remember that the standard 5 chord only had a single leading tone as well. The difference there is that the leading note moved up to the root note of the 1 chord. This is the tonic note of the scale as well, so it's much grander. Here's a reminder how the plagal cadence sounds. And now enters our hero, the minor 4 chord and the minor plagal cadence. As you know, in the key of C major, this chord is F minor. It is constructed with the notes F, A flat and C, so only a single note difference with the F major chord. But this single note is what makes all the difference. You know from the F major chord that both chords share the C note, and the F note is leading to the E note in the 1 C major chord. But the change now is the A flat note. Rather than being a whole step away from the G note, it is now that important half step distance. This creates the tension and drama that you can hear. Like the 5 dominant 7th chord discussed earlier, This 4 chord is now supercharged with 2 half-step resolutions, providing tension, drama, and a desire to be resolved. Let's have another listen to it. You've now got a deep understanding of where the minor 4 chord comes from and why it's so powerful in cadences. But how else can it be used? Well, now it's time for the 4th step, the MMT cadence. By far the most common way you'll see the minor 4 chord used in popular music is with the MMT cadence. This stands for major minor tonic. This is really simple. You play the standard major 4 chord, followed by the minor 4, and then the 1 tonic chord. Here's how that sounds in the key of C major. You know all of the reasons why the minor 4 to 1 cadence is so pleasing. But why does the major 4 to minor 4 work so well? Well, there's a single note difference between major 4 and minor 4. The third note becomes a flat or minor third. In the C major key examples, major 4 is F major. The third note in F major is A. If you drop this note by half a step, then you get to A flat. So this creates another of those pleasing half-step resolutions I've been showing you. There's also an element of interest and surprise moving from a major chord to its minor version. It also acts as a continuation of the minor plagal cadence I discussed earlier. The third note in the major 4 chord descends half a step to the flat third note in the minor 4 chord, which moves another half step down to the 5th note in the 1 chord. In this example in the key of C major, this creates a pleasing downward line A, A flat, G. It's also easy to arrive at this change through experimentation, particularly on the piano or guitar, which might explain its widespread use. You've mastered the MMT cadence, now it's time for some variations on the theme. If you want to enrich the sound of the MMT cadence, then you can play the minor 4 chord as a minor 6th. This involves adding a single note to the chord, but gives the chord a distinct grand edge. I've made a video all about these chords if you'd like to learn more. This is known as a Hollywood cadence, named after its brief appearance in the 20th Century Fox fanfare. If you want to add a darker edge to your song, you can alter the MMT in another way. Instead of resolving to the 1 chord after the minor 4, you can instead move to the 6 chord. This is another minor chord, but also the relative minor chord of the 1 chord. This is because it shares 2 notes with the 1 chord. In functional harmony, you can also use the 6 chord as a tonic substitute, so it can work well in this position. You can learn more about this in my chord progression rollercoaster video. But now you're moving away from the dramatic 4 minor chord to another minor chord. It also maintains the 2 half-step movements. In this example in the key of C major, the A flat note moves back up half a step to A. After the 6 chord, you're free to move where you like in your progression. In this example, I'll resolve to the 1 chord. There's another variation which I'll reveal at the end of this video, so stick around for that. So far I've been playing 1 chord per bar in the examples, but there's a universe of variation you can inject into your minor 4 progressions, so let's dig into some of them now. The minor 4 is a longing, powerful chord. As such, it benefits from being heard for an extended period, allowing it to breathe and sink into the listener's mind. You can hear this in Creep by Radiohead, where the chord is heard for 2 bars in the intro and verse. Here's an example with the minor 4 ringing out for 2 bars before resolving to 1. You can also go the other way and play the chord for half a bar. This is a really common approach, allowing the minor 4 to share a bar with the major 4. This highlights the difference between the two, while still allowing enough time for the minor 4 to be considered. You can hear this in Jar of Hearts by Christina Perri. Here's an example which demonstrates this. You don't tend to find the minor 4 for shorter periods than this, for the reasons I've mentioned, but let's have a listen to it played like this anyway. I'll use the previous example but change the minor 4 to a quarter of a bar. There's also other considerations you can make when playing minor 4. A big part of this is the play style that you are utilising. The examples so far have been solid block chords that ring out until the next change. Like the longer bars, this allows the minor 4 to resonate and be properly absorbed by the listener. But how would different approaches work? Well, a really common and nice approach is to use arpeggios. They allow the minor 4's subtlety to ring out and be heard, and are often played at a slightly slower tempo, so are a great match here. For example, you could also think about different strumming patterns on the guitar or rhythmic playing on the piano. Something more vigorous and upbeat can start to absorb some of the nuance in the chord and the minor play chord cadence. This might be something you're aiming for, so feel free to experiment. Here are a couple of varied examples to give you something to think about. These ideas also come into contact with the sounds and effects you are using with the minor 4 chord. There's a universe of potential here, so my suggestion would be to listen to songs you enjoy that have the minor 4 chord in them and look out for how it gets presented there. But here I'm going to use the most black and white examples: clean guitar and distorted guitar. Distorted guitars don't tend to work as well with more complex chords. A lot of this comes down to how you control the distortion, which could be a video series in its own right. But because the MMT cadence is reliant on a single note line for its core strength, you might want to consider avoiding distortion or heavy effects. Or at least starting with a cleaner sound and then dialing it up as far as you think works. With that in mind, next up I'll play the MMT cadence 4 times, once with a single chord per bar and then arpeggiated. The first 2 will be with a clean guitar sound and then the second with a distorted sound. Have a listen for the difference and decide for yourself which you prefer. Another important consideration is where and how you play your chords. This brings up the idea of chord voicings. There is more than one way to play a chord. This is easy to visualise on the piano, where the notes are laid out in a logical way, and once you know the notes in a chord, you are free to play them anywhere. It is a less utilised idea on the guitar. Guitarists tend to learn 1 or 2 versions of a chord and just default to them, but the whole neck is available for you to play your progressions on. Different voicings of the same chord have different feels and can help to create effects and movement in your progression you might otherwise neglect. In this next example, I'll play the MMT cadence twice. The first time I'll use pretty standard open shapes you learn on the guitar. On the second repeat, I'll switch to bar chords and arrange them in such a way that there is a rising up in pitch. Listen to the difference this brings to progression. Have a listen and then think about ways you could approach this in your own songwriting. You also want to be mindful of how often you use borrowed chords like the minor 4. Think of it like cooking and adding salt or spice. A sprinkling here and there can transform your dish and elevate it, but throw in too much and it can become an over-seasoned mess. The 7th step is to think about how minor 4 can influence the rest of your song, including the melody. A really common way to write melodies is just to use notes from the underlying chord. As the chords change, the selection of melody notes change. If you follow this rule, then the introduction of a borrowed chord will open up some extra notes to you that aren't in any other chords from the key. Look at this next example in the key of C major. The rhythm of the melody is the same over the first 3 chords. As the chords change, the notes change. This kind of idea particularly highlights the difference between the major 4 and the minor 4. That flat or minor third note of the chord is the difference between major and minor and is integral to the sound of this chord. So showing it off in the melody can be powerful, particularly if combined with a significant lyric at the same time. The significance of this note means that it is the obvious choice for melodies over the minor 4 chord, but this has landed several people in hot water when writing songs with the minor 4, as I mentioned at the start of the video. The Air That I Breathe is a ballad written by the singer-songwriter Albert Hammond and the songwriter Mike Hazelwood. It was initially recorded by Hammond on his debut album, It Never Rains in Southern California, in 1972. The English rock band Radiohead reused the chord progression and the melody of The Air That I Breathe for their 1992 song Creep. After Rondor Music, the publisher of The Air That I Breathe, took legal action, Hammond and Hazelwood received co-writing credits and a percentage of the royalties. Hammond said Radiohead were honest about having reused the composition, and so he and Hazelwood accepted only a small part of the royalties. Radiohead later sued singer Lana Del Rey for allegedly plagiarising Creep in her 2017 song Get Free. The copyright dispute was settled, and the writing credits on Get Free were not changed as a result. But all of these songs used a minor 4 chord in the MMT cadence. You can't copyright a chord progression in music, but because so many songwriters use chord notes for their melodies, the two become strongly linked. And with a powerful chord like the minor 4, it can become so pivotal to a song that you start treading on other people's compositions. So be aware of the power of this chord. Now you might wonder, how can you avoid such an obvious melody approach? Well, one strategy to play and write over a borrowed chord is to switch to the scale from which it was borrowed. So in this case, whilst the minor 4 is heard, you can use the parallel minor scale. These ideas for melody can also apply to solos and riffs. In our example in the key of C major, this means using the notes from the C natural minor, which are C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat and B flat. Next up, I'll explore this idea by repeating a motif over the first 2 chords and then changing it up over the borrowed chord to just use notes from C minor. In particular, listen to the E flat note, which isn't in the underlying F minor chord. The minor 4 chord also works well with another borrowed chord, which you can hear in this example. This is called the flat 6, and you can learn all about it in the video on screen. I'll see you over there.